enjoying it. So I do wonder how you're feeling today. It's been, I worked this out, I did count them, 494 days since the church was told they could no longer sing in communal worship. That's a really long time, isn't it? That's a lot of days. And is it a time you ever thought we'd ever anticipate? I don't know about you, but I certainly took for granted singing in church before this COVID time. Just walking into a church building and having that ability to sing and worship in the way that seems just the most easiest way to worship taken away, has been good for some, maybe it's a challenge to do something different, but then bad for others because it's limited the way that they can connect and offer worship and praise to God. Some of us might have found beauty in listening to songs, maybe old and new, in this time, and having to really listen to the words or read the words without thinking about the computing of singing it back out. We've tried a few different ways in our services, haven't we? Because we've met together, we've done some action songs where we've had to go using our bodies as a way to worship God. We've had a bit of a dance at times. We've even tried sign language, so communicating just in a different way to using our mouths. For some of us, not singing aloud has been a really hard challenge, hasn't it? And perhaps it's put us in a place where we don't even feel that comfortable in offering our worship to God because we can't do what feels most natural. And then for some of you in this room, maybe we won't quite be back to normal until we can have the band as well and we can enjoy the fellowship and the worship offered by the band, and as we have that as an accompaniment as well. But you know what, no matter how you feel, whether you've quite enjoyed the pause from singing, whether you love being able to sing again, whether you're still holding out to play your instrument or to listen to a band, that's okay, because all of those things are acts of worship, aren't they? They're all things that are helpful to us in worship, and it's okay that we all have different preferences in that. Now, when we think of worship and the different ways we can worship, and I think of examples from the Bible, my mind very quickly goes to King David. And I don't know if it does for you as well, but that's why I chose the passage for today. Because he was known as one who would worship the Lord with all of his might, whether that was playing his harp, as he did for Saul, whether he's writing psalms, which we've got a whole book of, haven't we, in the Bible, or as we see today, dancing in the middle of the street. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, David is seen dancing in public in a linen ephod, which would have been his undergarments, basically, in the culture of the day. So it's the equivalent of us dancing down the streets in our underwear. Perhaps they're not the most dignified of things to do, as the Bible reading says. Now, I'm not familiar with anybody here, or even anybody that I know, that would naturally choose that way to worship God. We don't really associate that behaviour with worship to God, do we? Perhaps maybe we've had a few too many to drink, falling out of a nightclub might be a little bit more of an image we can start to imagine. But David is dancing in this way because he cannot contain his excitement and his joy as he witnesses the Ark of the Covenant being returned to Jerusalem after being away for so long. This act represented God's blessing returning to the people of Jerusalem and God's presence dwelling in Jerusalem as God's home. That's incredible, isn't it? And it was a really highly significant moment and was such a powerful experience that David literally just can't keep it in. And he does, in complete abandonment, just offer his praise and worship to God. He doesn't care about what he looks like. He doesn't care what people think. His actions are all about his gratefulness to God and are centred entirely around him. And I wonder if our acts of worship are just the same today. David was a passionate worshipper of God, and he teaches us so very much about what it means to be passionate worshippers too. David was a well-respected, strong man and yet he allowed himself to be seen dancing before God in public as the centre of attention in undignified clothing, because the only thing that mattered to him was his praise that he offered to God, and really not what the other people around him thought about what that was. But I wonder, do we sometimes hold back in our worship to God because we're self-conscious? Because we do worry about what those around us think of us when we worship, maybe a little bit more than what we think God might think of our act of worship. I know I, for one, have certainly been guilty of that. When I feel led by God to worship in a particular way, I hold back because I'm thinking, oh, what are they going to think of me if I do that? I know I do that. So it's not me passing a judgment, it's just saying I know it's possible we do that. But David was prepared to be criticised by others for the way in which he chose to worship. For him, it wasn't about fitting in or conforming to the preferences. Michal could not have been more embarrassed of the way in which David conducted himself, and she really did not hold back in letting him know. And our heartfelt worship can sometimes look a little bit silly to someone else, but that's not a reason to change the way that we worship God. There may be people that we can think of in our lives, like Michal, who have maybe commented on the way that we sing, maybe if it's not always in tune. Maybe the way that we play, maybe we get a part wrong, so we're playing a band piece. Maybe the way that we dance, or even the way that we choose to dress when we come to worship. But upon stepping out and worshipping beyond our self-consciousness, I'd rather be a David in my worship to the Lord than a Michal. I'd rather be more bothered about what God thinks of me in my worship and I of him in that moment than be more focused on what others think or on what I think of someone else. What about you today? Now, David's worship was all about what God wanted, as we've already seen. It didn't matter how he felt or how others felt about that act of worship. It was all completely about God. David's priority was about letting God know how much David loved him, how thankful David was for him, how much David trusted him, how much David wanted to be in God's presence, no matter what. And we've shared testimonies this morning, haven't we, of the reasons, similar reasons of why we worship God. But for those who haven't shared, or even for those that have, there'll obviously be other reasons at times where you sing a particular song or worship in a certain way. And I wonder what those reasons are. And does the reason why you worship God, does that decision impact the way that you actually worship? Does it make a difference to the way that you worship? The reason, does it impact the way? We've been really blessed by so many song choices for today, and we've still got a few to listen and to join in with. But with each song that we've listened to, with each song that's been chosen, each reason has been different, hasn't it, why someone picks a song. Perhaps we've enjoyed some of those songs, perhaps we've struggled maybe with others, perhaps we've had a different tune than the one that we'd be used to. Perhaps if you were choosing, you'd have picked a different tune. But despite your thoughts, your preferences, I really hope that today you've just enjoyed the moment to listen and to join in worship. I hope that if you're the one that's chosen a song, you've enjoyed that moment of sharing that favourite song of yours without worrying whether it's someone else's favourite or whether they liked it or not. I hope that you will be able to choose to celebrate God for who He is in that moment for you, without worrying about other people. Because it's not about our preferences when it comes to worship anyway, is it? Not really. It's not for our benefit, it's for God's. And so remember today that God doesn't mind whether we sing, shout, dance, clap, or even do something else. All that God wants from us is heartfelt worship that celebrates God for who he is for us. And David has been such a great example to us in our worship, not only in action and attitude, but in pointing us to Jesus. He's our true king, he's our shepherd, and he's the one that's truly demonstrated worship to his Father with joy, with abandonment, and without dignity as he laid his life down for each of us. And how can we not worship with all of our hearts, just like David did, in response to that reality in our lives?